Greetings hobbyists, this is Artisans of All. In this video we're going to have a look at how to make the wooden and plaster sections of the top floor of this building. So we were working on this fantasy building in the last video to do the bottom stone floors. You don't need to have seen that to be able to follow along with this if you're not interested in the stone floors, but if you are, there's a link in the top right hand corner, otherwise you can just get straight into this and see what we're doing. Now I should mention that this video does use machine tools and hard ups and box cutter. You can use all the techniques shown on this video without using these add-ons, but it's just there to make things a little bit quicker for me. So if you do want to get those, then you're very welcome to. Machine tools is free, you do have to pay for hard ups and box cutter, but I would say it's really worth it, and there's a link in the top right hand corner for some videos that I've got on box cutter. Now to start off, you can see me blitzing through the sculpting of this wood. I'm not going to cover that in this video. I've already made a video on how to create wooden textures. There's a link to that in the top right hand corner. If that's what you want to go and see, go and have a look at that. Don't watch this video, that's not what this is going to focus on. So as you can see, I'm just sculpting this wood out in the most basic way. On the video there's 3 different methods of doing that. One with sculpting, one using alpha textures, and one using a combination of the both. Now in this I'm just using the plain sculpting method because it's the quickest, it's easiest, and it makes some quite large impressions, which really is what I need for this project because it's going to be in 28mm scale. Now this does take a bit of time to do, and I'm definitely not going to say that it doesn't. You could do other methods. For example, you could create the whole thing using a displacement texture, but it will add even more geometry onto this process, which is already going to be pretty heavy on the computer and its processing power. So instead I've just sculpted this manually, and while it does take a bit of time, while this is sped up, I think doing this whole plank took me in the region of about 35 minutes. It's quite a relaxing process when you get into it. It's kind of a bit like painting when you're just going through and adding bits on. So it's actually something I quite enjoyed doing and found relatively fun. As I say, there's some techniques that I've already posted a link to, and there's a link in the description, so go and check that out. But we're going to be looking at how we actually bring these textures into this project and make this building out of them. So now that we've got that, we can start working on the wooden frame. Now, we could do a lot of this with arrays, but I'm actually going to do this manually just because a few errors would make this look a little bit more realistic, or, well, not perfect, which a building should be, especially if it's built in sort of this fantasy medieval sort of setting. So I'm just going to use Shift and D and then the middle mouse button to get those on axis, and then just put these in approximately the correct place. And then so we don't have the same thing every time. Notice that this one in the middle probably doesn't matter, and actually you wouldn't really see them both at the same time, but it's just for my own pedantic mental well-being. So I'm just going to RX and then do that 90, and then RX and do that 180. So they've not got the same edges facing. And at that point we can just grab one of them. So I'm just going to grab this one, Shift D to duplicate it, and then I'm just going to R and 90 to have that round the other way, and then we'll just G, move that again over to approximately the right place with a slight bit of overlap, so we're going to have this more interesting look there with it sticking out over the stone, and then Shift and D again, middle mouse button to get that on the X-axis, and then click, and then Shift and D, and I'm going to do this approximately a third of the way each time. And again, there's going to be some errors here, but that's what's going to make this look interesting. So something about there. Now at this point we've got these overlaps. Now this is going to be really up to you. Firstly, this is going to boolean quite poorly together, but there's ways of dealing with that. But I don't want that. I want this to look like a building that is actually being constructed, so we're actually going to make some joints here. Now, if you want to do this quickly, the easiest way would just be to boolean off these edges so that effectively you only have it going up to about there or something like that. But I don't want to do that. I want to have some proper jointing for this building. So what I'm going to do is grab that one, Shift and S, and move the cursor to the selected. Then I'm going to come to side view, Shift and A, and I'm going to bring in a cube. S to scale that up so it's just a little bit wider than this beam, and then I'm going to G and move that up on the Z axis to about halfway, so somewhere around there. So we've got that one over there, and then I'm just going to press S, again middle mouse button to select it onto the Y axis, and then I'm just going to drag that all the way across there. And what we can do is we can delete this out of these large beams. So what I need to do is, to make this most effective, I'm going to actually grab those, Control and J to join those together. So now this is one item. And if you've watched my previous video on booleaning, this is what joining's for, not for making things overlap. And then what I can do is grab this one, shift select that beam, the one that it's in relation to, and then I'm going to right click if I've got machine tools, align relative, and then I'm just going to click that, shift click, space bar, and now we've got all of them in the correct place. And then we can just grab those, select that, control and minus, and then we've got these nice cuts out of each of the beams. So nice, really quick, simple way of doing that, and then I can just H and hide those. So it really doesn't take too long. Again, that was using machine tools, but you could have done that manually as well. Then we're going to do the same for the other beams. So we now need to cut these ones, but this time at the bottom, so it looks like that these would join into one another. So I want to come to this selection here, and then we've got the origin still on this one, so we'll just use this one, Shift and S, and then we're going to bring this to the selected, so the cursor to the selected, Shift and A, mesh, and then cube, and we're going to go about exactly the same thing. So we're going to make this a little bit bigger, but this time we want to, where's it gone over here, bring it to there, and then we'll just do this at the bottom. And we could make this just a little bit bigger to match, but either way that'll be fine. So somewhere to about there. And then I'm just going to G and Z that up so that we're causing there to be not an overlap when we're going to boolean these together. And obviously that would mean that they're free floating, but we'll come to that solution in a second. So S, move that out somewhere around there, and then at this point we're going to need to separate these out. So we're going to apply all, and then go into vertex mode, A, P, and then by loose parts. So now each of these is separated again. And then once we've got these separated, what we need to do is select each of them, Shift and S, and then we're going to have to select the object origins to the geometry. So now that one's there and that one's there. If we don't do this, our quick trick to move them across isn't going to work because it works off of the origins. So then click the object, shift click what we want to copy it relative to, right click, align relative, shift click there, and then shift click there, space, and then we've got those in place. We're going to do the same thing, but this time for these. So we're going to select all of them, Control and J, just to combine them together, and then 1, 2, 3, shift select, Control and minus, and let Ball Tools do its thing. And then we can H to hide each of these. And you can see here, if I just use this one as an example, we've got this nice joint there. Well, I would say this is not what we want. So that might be just a slight problem with where the object origin is. So let's go back into this. Let's Q and ever scroll to find this cutter. Here it is. And then we're just going to G and Z and move that up a little bit. And then this is really not going to like that. It's trying to do too much in one go. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to delete that cutter. And this is mostly a problem because we're trying to do it while it was an active boolean. I'm going to do the same here. So let's Q, ever scroll, and get rid of that one as well. So the reason this is having issues is because this sculpted wood has just got so many faces and vertices on it that if I'm trying to move the cutter while it's applied, it's just taking too much processing power to work it out. So a simpler solution is just going to be to start this bit again. Let's bring that back, and we're going to do the same thing again, but we'll sort it out later. So we're going to grab that, and then we're going to do exactly the same thing again. So relative align, that one there, and space. But this time, before we actually do the booleans, we'll fix this. So if we see here, inside view, I want G and Z that up to be just above the other one. So just there, and then we'll do the same with this one if it needs it. And yes, it looks like it does. So G, Z. If ever in doubt of this, never be afraid of making it so that it's visible, so that we can do that. But you'll notice this one, this is what we wanted. We wanted this slight gap between them. So now that we've done that, we can go back to our joined selection. We've got these two. Let's delete those because they're not actually doing anything as a boolean, because at this point we've deleted the objects they were going to boolean away. And then we can select our two cutters that are better aligned, Control and minus, and then we've got that sorted. And then we can H that and H that to hide them. And then we've got these nice perfect cut with a slight gap between, and this is what I meant earlier when I said they're going to be free floating. At the moment they're not actually joined, or they're not actually connected, so we wouldn't be able to boolean those together in any meaningful way. But that's intentional. It means that we've got this gap here that we're going to be able to see, and we're going to then put something in place to make this work, and we'll show that now. So let's apply these. So Q operations smart apply, and then Q operations and smart apply, and I'm using smart apply instead of apply all because it's a bit faster. And if you want to check that out, I've got a video of that in the top right hand corner in the description. It is notably faster, especially when you get to complex operations like this, and then we need to put something in place so that when we boolean these together, this is actually going to work. And we're going to do exactly the same trick again. Actually, I'm just going to come to side view, Shift S, cursor selected, and then Control A, Mesh and Cube, but this time I'm going to make sure the cube is smaller than the column. S and scale it so that it's going through all of our joints. Let's double check this over here. So yep, it's gone through the joints, and you can see what this is going to do. It's going to add this in here so that these actually connect together. And we could always just S and make this a little bit smaller if we wanted to. Let's just check that it goes through all the other way. So no, let's just go into vertex mode, grab those, G, and drag that across there. Yep, that's through. But what it's going to mean is that when we boolean this together, we're going to have these relatively clean booleans because these two complex objects aren't interacting. The only interaction is between, well, this nice flat cube and the objects themselves. So it's going to be an easier boolean. We're going to have less problems, and also it's going to look better. We're going to have these gaps, and depending on your 3D printer, you might want to really exaggerate those, and I will admit a slight failing in this, in that we don't have the grain going down the cuts, but at this scale, you are really not going to see that. So back into object mode, and we've got that there, and then all we're going to do is same trick again. So select the inner bit, shift select, right click and align relative, shift click that one, shift click that one, space bar, and then we've now got them all on each of the different things. So this is how we're going to be making our wooden frame, and it really is that easy. It's not actually that complicated. It's just the time taken to make the wood texture, which actually, as I said, is pretty relaxing. I quite like doing it. And then we're going to boolean all of these together. So I generally find the best way of doing this is booleaning these to the object here, so Control and plus, and then we can Q operations and smart apply. So if I come into isolation mode, you can see what we've got here. Oops, let's just hide that. We've got this object where we've got the cutout, but we've got this boolean cube in place, which is going to join it to the other parts of the frame. Once I've done that, I'm just going to do that with the others as well. So there, Control plus, Q operations and smart apply, and then same for the final one. And we've got this ready to go. Now we could do something with this and where it's going through the fireplace as well. Obviously we don't want it to actually go through the fireplace. That's not going to quite work, but I'm going to leave that because I'm probably going to fiddle around with this fireplace and its position at some point. So let's not do that yet. We can always cut that out later. So let's grab 1, 2, 3, and then those, and Control and plus, and then we'll get that boolean together, and we should have our frame for each of our floors. And we've got that working, and Q operations and smart apply, and we've got, if we isolate it, here's our frame. And you'll see these joints look really nice at this point. We've got this internal bit, so we've got a slight gap there, but this will look fine, and it will actually stay together as one piece because of those internal cubes, and we don't have as many problems with our booleans here that we would otherwise have. Now there is the option of adding an extra one in here, but I don't think that's really going to be necessary. So let's press the N panel, let's get out our 3D print and check all. We are going to have things that we need to fix here. Let's be perfectly clear about that. This is not going to be perfect. And actually it's really not too bad. With only 33 intersecting faces, that's not much of a problem. And with no non-manifold edges, you can see why this is a good way of solving this as a problem. If we were to just have boolean these together as solid parts without having done these cutouts, you'd have bad times. Let's put it that way. So let's get back out of that. We'll actually look at fixing that at a later date. What I'm going to do now is just Control A, Mesh and Cube, and then S to make that a massive cube, G, and I'm just going to go somewhere around there, S, and let's scale that up. Using the middle mouse button to select the right axis, and then move that to, actually, do I want these sticking out? Would that look cool? It would look interesting. I'm going to leave that about there, and then Shift and D and do the same thing about there, and then Shift D, R90, and again do the same thing about here, and then grab all those, grab that, Control and minus, and we've got rid of those extra edges or bits sticking out, so we're left with our perfect shaped frame. Now at this point we do, and it should be noted, have these cut bits here which haven't been sculpted. That is something we're going to have to do. Well, I mean, actually I say that, you wouldn't have to do it, you could leave them perfectly flat if you wanted to. It's entirely up to you, and that's a decision for you to make. So all I'm going to do here is Q, Operations, Smart Apply, and then I'm just going to Shift and D. I'm actually going to drag this down so that I know it's about the same height as our other floor. Grab both of those, GZ, move them both up, move that down to about there. And now that we've got that, because we don't want this looking totally the same, I mean, again, at a distance, are you going to notice this? Don't know. But what we will do is we're just going to check that we've got our origin in the center, which it approximately is, and we're just going to press SZ -1, and that turns that upside down. So it's still relatively possible for you to notice that it's the same thing, but meh, I'm alright with it. And then we've got our frame for the top and bottom of this floor. And then all we need to do is put in things like our cross supports. Now I have just realized I've made the classic error of not actually leaving myself one of the originals. So what I'm going to have to do is save this. So what I've just done is I've just gone into my saved file, and I'm just going to Control C, copy objects, come back to our new file, Control and V, and I've got that there. What an absolute idiot. Easy to do though. And then it's just the matter of putting in our other supports. Now we are going to have some windows here, so I'm actually going to put in a central beam somewhere around here on each of these. So just there to be the support of the window, and then I actually want one again higher up, so Shift D, Z, and then let's put that there, so that'll be the top of the window frame. And then once again, to stop these being identical, let's RX and 90, RX and -90, so that now each one of them looks different. And then we can grab those, Shift and D, keep that on the same axis there by using the middle mouse button, and then bring those over to about here. And that's going to be the bottom and top of our window frames. If we wanted to, we could make these look a lot less solid. So for example, I'm probably not going to have these coming all the way and sticking out. Don't think that would look right. And if we wanted to, we could even make these look smaller just by grabbing them, selecting individual origins, and let's just S and then Shift and X, and we can make these a little bit smaller, something like there. And that's going to look a little bit better. We don't want these being these really hefty bits of wood. And then again, I'd need to stop doing this. Shift and D, let's bring that to the side here. And this is because I forgot to again save the original version, and I'm just going to press N, come into my item, and then where we've got this scale, I'm going to put that back to 1 and that one back to 1, so we've got them the right size for our outside supports. So let's keep that off to the side so I don't forget this again. Shift and D, R, 90, and then we've got one support's going to go there, and then we're going to have Shift and D, and I'm just going to move that down a bit. And I'm moving this down so that we don't end up with identical bits of wood. I could do the rotation trick again if I wanted to, so entirely up to you which way you go. Let's grab that one there, and then Shift and D, move that along to approximately the right place. So again, we've got there. Let's have a look at that. Make that a little bit better. And then we're going to come in here, we're going to bring in a cube, Shift A, Mesh and Cube, S, scale that up, that's G there. We want it just below our beams. We're going to do exactly the same trick again, so we've got a nice slight gap to make it easier to boolean. S, there, S, and then there, and then I'm just going to go into face mode, grab that face, G and Z all the way up, object, and then let's bring that down, Shift D, and then we want that coming in about here, and let's just make sure that is perfect to about there. And to make this quicker, let's grab all of those beams there, there, and there, Control J to join them, and then there. Select those, Control and minus, and we can H to hide those, and you can see we've got our beams with a slight gap, so we can do exactly the same trick that we did with the internal clean, in inverted commas, cubes, so that we don't have that problem. And then we should do the same for these. So I'm just going to join those together, make a cube, and then we're going to use those to boolean out the edges or the ends of those. And these ones we're going to make so they don't overlap or stick out the side, because that way they're going to look like they're more minor, which fits in with their size, as if they've been either nailed in or bolted on in some way to the ones at the end. So hopefully you can see what we're doing here to make this frame out for our wooden building. Do you want these on the sides as well? Don't know, entirely up to you, and depending on what you want your building to look like. I want a little bit of variation, and these are mostly there to frame our windows. So for me, that is perfectly good enough. And then I'm going to queue, operations, and smart apply. And for these, queue, operations, and smart apply. Now at this point, I want to get my walls in, just to make everything a bit cleaner and easier to see. So what I'm going to do is Shift A, mesh, and again, I'll bring in a cube, G that up. Let's get that in place. S to scale that up. I don't think I want this too thick. I mean, we need to have it a decent size because it's a wall, but we don't want it to be too much that it's going to get in the way. And we do want to see these protruding wooden beams because we've just spent all our time doing those. SZ, let's get that up to about there. S and X, let's bring that all the way across, something like that. And there we go. So that's going to be our walls. Now, let's make those a bit thinner so that this wooden beam sticks out a little bit more. Maybe something like that. Have a look at it on the other side. That looks okay. And then if we can Control and A and apply the scale, we can see that that is going to be on the y-axis about 2 millimeters thick. Let's S and Y. Let's actually bring that out a bit. We want that a bit thicker. Somewhere around 4 would be good. Or we could just come in here, type 4. Let's have a look the other side. That should be okay. So we'll stick with something like that at the moment, I think. Maybe let's 3.5. That should be thick enough for our wall. And let's not waste all of our resin. At this point, you've seen all of the major things that I wanted to talk about here, so I'm not going to keep doing them repeatedly at normal speed, so I wanted to speed this up. I didn't want to sort of go, and here's one I made earlier in a Blue Peter style. If you're not from the UK, Blue Peter's a program that was quite famed for sort of showing people how to do one stage and then doing, here's one I made earlier, and it generally looked way better than what they were doing in the first place. Do other countries have versions of Blue Peter? Is it even still running? Maybe I'm really showing my age here. Anyway, I'm going to speed this up so you can see that I'm doing all the individual stages, and if you need to, you can slow it down, but all I'm doing is reproducing those walls and adding in more of the beams to frame them where there's going to be some windows. Then we're going to do a similar thing to what we did in the last video to cut out the windows, and we're just going to use a cube to boolean them out. So nothing of particular note there, but once again, I'm putting them in place by hand. So they're not going to be perfect. I'm not using any tools to sort of center them, which means that you're going to actually get something that's not exactly right, but is going to look a little bit more interesting. And any of those slight deviations from being perfect are going to make it look more realistic and like a medieval or fantasy building. As always, I hope you found this video useful. I know I didn't really show anything new in terms of techniques here, but that jointing I think should be fairly useful for people, and it's a technique that really does make booleaning more reliable when you're doing these very complex shapes. Have a great day, guys.